hopefully it's clear already, maybe it was before you even came today, that we have a vision in North Carolina. We have a pretty clear sense of where we want to end up. And today you'll hear a lot about the specific plans, excuse me, specific plans that we have for how to get there. But before we dive into those plans, which by the way are not fully baked and for which we need a lot of your input and feedback, but before we talk about those plans, let's make sure that we all are starting from the same base of information about how we did get here, about what's undergirding those plans, the philosophy and the history that brings us to develop these. By a show of hands, how many of you were working in public schools in North Carolina between 2006 and 2010? All right, looks like most of the room. So I would assume then that you realize that we were working in these areas that you see up here long before Race to the Top came along. That as a state, we were already pushing for better standards and assessments, rethinking standards and assessments. We were pushing for high, clear expectations for teachers and leaders, and a strong, reliable, valid assessment system that will give you the feedback you need to improve your professional practice. And we've been working for a long time to make sure we have a system in place to support whichever schools across the state need the most help. We have a diverse state, we have all kinds of situations, and the state needs to be in the business of helping districts and schools where they are so that they can rise up to the level that we all hope to be. We have a history in North Carolina of innovation and in thinking statewide. Some of the Race to the Top states are focused more on a few big districts. That's not the way we do things in North Carolina. You know that for us, it's all together. It's all or nothing. And you know that the ABCs was really the state's last big remodeling effort. And that put us on the path that Dr. Atkinson talked about, that you all have taken and run with, and taken us to higher student achievement, higher graduation rates. But times changed a little bit, probably a lot in some of your schools in terms of student body, in terms of the challenges that you recognized we needed to address as a state. And the state board recognized that, and in 2006 came out with their Future Ready goals, which really was the beginning of this remodeling effort that we're talking about today. In 2007, the Professional Teaching Standards Commission came out with the new teaching standards, which the state board adopted. And then in 2008, we really started to come up with operational plans and some very concrete efforts to put those future-ready goals into practice across the state. The state board's framework for change gave rise to ACRE, which hopefully you're all familiar with, the Accountability and Curriculum Reform effort, which was the work to rethink the standards, to rethink the curriculum, to rethink the assessments that you would use to measure student progress, what students know and are able to do. The teaching standards gave rise to the new evaluation system, which has taken a few years to roll out, but is now statewide, and surely you're all familiar with, maybe more so than you'd like to be. And from assistance teams, which we had in place under the ABCs, we've gone through several evolutions, from assistance teams to the high school turnaround program to district and school transformation today, learning from the lessons of each one of those in order to come up with the best possible way to support districts and schools where they are to help them develop capacity. So when the Race to the Top application came out in 2009, and we were thinking about whether we should go for it, how we should go for it, we looked around the room and said, you know what, we're doing all of the things that the federal government is suggesting states should be focused on. So we felt like we had a great opportunity to talk about what we're doing, grab that money, as much of it as they would give us, and use it to push forward all of these initiatives that we're working on already, particularly important at a time when our primary investors in our remodeling effort, the General Assembly, were pulling back our funding. So Race to the Top is absolutely critical to our remodeling effort. It's not all of it. In fact, we want to talk about the remodeling work as ready, which is a much more encompassing set of initiatives. than Race to the Top. But Race to the Top clearly is helping us move further and faster. Let's talk about Ready, because really it is meant to be a framework for talking about all this work, as Dr. Atkinson said, for using common language, for making sure that everyone understands what we're working on and how we're pulling together in the same direction. Mike Martin, an analyst with our department, is going to come up now and lay out the rest of today's agenda as we get into those detailed plans.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk quickly this morning. I'm going to take about 5 or 10 minutes to kind of frame what we're doing and then turn it over to members of our leadership to really dig into the content this morning. One of the things that we really wanted to do when we thought about this was really present the logic of what we're doing very clearly and make sure that message was very student-centered and that we used as few acronyms as possible. So to try to talk about it in as clear and as plain language as possible. So the first thing we said is that our goal is ensuring that students are ready for life. And we know that school is by no means the only thing that does that, but it has a huge amount of potential. We have kids for 13 years, so we know that our goals are making sure that kids are great writers, clear writers, that they can pick up on the subtlety of language, both in literature and with the Common Core informational text, and that they think like scientists and like mathematicians. These are the things that we want kids to know and be able to do. I taught high school math for 5 years, and one of the things in the math practices in the Common Core, the first one is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, which I think, when I think about my experience as an educator, that's what I worked on constantly, and that's a worthy outcome. So we wanted to stay focused on getting students ready for life, and then we ask ourselves, well, what's the means for us to get there? And we answer that question resoundingly that it's instruction. It's what goes on in the classroom, and it's teachers. So we believe that the quality of an education system can't exceed the quality of its teachers. So we started at that point, and that's the underlying logic. And then we said, well, teachers and students need to be engaged in meaningful goals. That starts with the standard course of study, which you'll hear about a lot this morning, the Common Core and the essential standards, fewer, clearer, higher standards. Secondly, we said we want an assessment system that focuses both on what happens in June, but maybe more so what happens in August and September, when we check for understanding and use that to change our practice. And lastly, we wanted an accountability model that aligns with the ambitions that we have for kids when they graduate high school. So those are the sort of 3 big goal areas. And then we said, well, teachers, if we know teachers are key, we know one of the most important things that teachers think about, and I can feel like I can say this because it's a room of teachers and principals primarily, is school leadership. We know that teachers want to work in an environment where high expectations are established and where they can continue to improve their practice. And then very much connected to that, and something we'll spend a lot of time talking about today, is a fair evaluation system. And I think a lot of times, candidly, we feel like, I think teachers often feel like they don't get the kind of feedback that they want to improve their practice, and principals, on the other hand, struggle to have the time to do it the way they want to do it. So we know that because teaching is hard, that we need to focus on constantly evaluating and creating cycles of improvement. The third thing is a sort of catch-all for a number of things that we're doing, many of them enabled by Race to the Top, but just tools and training and resources to improve practice. One of the things you'll hear about today is the Instructional Improvement System, which will furnish a lot of those formative assessments that we talked about before. And then stepping back, another big part of what we're doing is thinking about how teachers come into the classroom, whether they come through schools of education or through other routes, making sure that those programs are accountable for actually preparing teachers to be ready to teach in the classroom. And so that's a big piece of that as well. And then the final piece is supporting low-achieving LEAs in schools.